Today's episode is exciting to me for a few different reasons. First and foremost, this will be the inaugural episode in the TrikBrix Castle Retrospective, which will undoubtedly span dozens of episodes over a great period of time, peppered amongst our other retrospectives, of course. While it's not my favorite theme, it is pretty high on the list, and you can't have a well-rounded vintage LEGO collection without a few castle sets mixed in, right? And the other reason I'm excited to share this with you is because of how it ended up in my possession. You can call it luck, you can call it a miracle, you can call it whatever you want, but it's pretty amazing. In fact, it's the absolute highlight of my LEGO collecting adventure, and these days, with vintage set prices climbing higher and higher, it might just give you some hope for yours as well. So let's turn back time to the Middle Ages and see what all the classic castle fuss is about. Welcome to TrikBrix. Hello again everyone, I'm Jamie. Today's subject is hands down one of the best castles LEGO ever produced in the 80s. And it's from my personal favorite non-Forestman faction, the Black Knights. This is 6085 Black Monarch's Castle. This retailed for $68 when it was released in 1988, which adjusted for inflation is a whopping $180. And it only had 702 pieces, so this was definitely a set for your rich kid friends. Rounding out our stats are the 12 minifigures it included. Due to the nature of how I acquired this set, I don't have the box or the instructions, unfortunately. I'll tell you all about that and why miracles can happen toward the end of the video, but for now, we're just going to jump right into the set. The thing that really made this stick out from the other castles at the time was the color scheme. Besides the classic yellow castle, everything else to that point had been gray, and this predominantly black build really made this feel different, not to mention a bit foreboding and mysterious. While the Black Knights were never meant to be the quote-unquote bad guys, it's easy to see that as a kid in 1988, this is the perfect bad guy fortress for your Crusaders or Black Falcons to go up against. And if we're going with that scenario, the first thing anyone storming this castle is going to see is the front gate. Well, actually, they'll see the raised drawbridge barricading the front gate, but it's a simple matter to lower it thanks to this clever winch system up top. Let's just hope the gatekeeper didn't leave the stove on. The portcullis is simply constructed from 1x plates, and indeed it would be the last time we saw this technique for over 30 years. The next castle to feature a plate-built portcullis would be the Lion Knights Castle, released in 2022. Of course, it can also be raised and lowered remotely, though with the less elegant solution of one of these modified plates tied to the end of the string. I've come across this technique in a few pirate sets as well. It was fine for the time, but a good upgrade would be to replace it with a 2x2 winch element, like this. Now, if you're a true period-correct purist, be aware that this wasn't available for 2 more years, in 1990. But it's so nice to have the string neatly out of the way, I'm okay with it. The design of the gatehouse is both beautiful and iconic. Up top we have 2 flags, each sporting the Black Knight colors, and there's plenty of room to station a few archers up here. We get 4 archers in total, all identical. The Black Knights were interesting because they were one of the few factions that never got a torso with their crest emblazoned upon it. Instead, all of the figures in the sub-theme got realistic silver breastplates, or, like in this case, scale mail. A bullet-style helmet with chin strap protects a classic smiley, and this is the only face print we get for all 12 figures, since variations wouldn't come until the following year's pirate sets debuted. These are solid stud heads though, something that a lot of folks these days don't even know existed. Being archers, they naturally get a bow and arrow, as well as a quiver. I like how the top here is a bit larger than the main tower, a great design choice which is continued throughout the rest of the castle. Just a few studs of width and depth really go a long way in adding some nice architectural detail on each level, and I think it looks so much better than if these walls were just flat all the way to the top. Moving down, we have a pair of brick-built windows, or arrow slits, flanking this awesome little Black Knight's flag. This is such a cool piece, and it's placed on a hinge so you can angle it however you'd like. It also pairs perfectly with the two matching shields on either side, which, while a small inclusion, adds so much visual interest to the facade, and a nice little pop of color. To the right and left of the main tower, we'll find two more platforms where we can station some guards, and they're nicely protected behind these battlements. Just like the archers, we get 4 of these guys, but they're a bit more exciting to me because they're each given a shield, the same one we just saw on the front of the castle. It features the Black Knight's crest, a blue and yellow wyvern on a red background. It's a beautiful little piece of art, and we're given a grand total of 10 in this set. Their helmets have been around since the very inception of LEGO Castle, all the way back to 1978. And they get the same scale mail print as the archers, except here it's on a red torso. The only variation between the 4 is that 2 get spears and 2 get halberds. Beneath the platforms and along the front here, we get lots of inverted slopes and some small arches that give even more depth to the wall. And then we have 2 fairly rare elements on either side of the gate. This printed panel piece on the right was only ever found in one other set, the amazing and very desirable Black Knight's Castle, aka Dungeon Master's Castle, from 1992. The panel on the left is a one-and-done exclusive to Black Monarch's Castle, never to be seen again. You would think something this versatile would have been utilized in other castle or even pirate sets, but nope, this is its only home. One of the few features here I'm not really a fan of are these large gaps. It seems to me like the perfect target for any would-be intruders. I'm all out of light gray macaroni bricks at the moment, but I think a stack of those in here might be a nice addition. These slopes in the front and around the corner seem to be an approximation of a talus, which is a feature some real-life castles had to strengthen the base of their walls and make it more difficult for attackers to get their siege equipment as close as they needed. Normally, it would be a lot taller and go most of the way around, but nevertheless, I like this little touch. It gives the castle a firmly grounded feel. Spinning around, the black and gray theme is continued along the side walls, and there's ample space for minifigures to stand up top pretty much all the way around. And the crenellations run the length of the wall. Fun fact, there are 70 1x2 black bricks in this set. We've got an unlit torch here, which is mirrored on the other side as well. The color and element of the old trans-neon orange firepiece we all know and love wouldn't be invented until 1993, but I'm kind of surprised that they didn't throw in a few trans-yellow studs at least, like we'd see in later Castle and Pirate sets. Then again, to my knowledge, this was one of the first times this element was used for anything other than a space gun, so maybe they were still figuring out how to incorporate it into a historical setting. These 2 towers at both rear corners look fantastic, again hanging over the edge just enough to give us a really interesting and distinctive look. It widens out again at the top, and up here the crenellations utilize macaroni bricks to add some nice variation to the otherwise blocky shaping, and a red flag jazzes things up with some imaginary movement. This is another great place to station an archer, so they can keep an eye on things and take down any pesky assailants. Continuing, along the rear we find a row of what I've learned are called machicolations next to this walkway. These overhanging gaps in the wall would have been used to dump everything from rocks to boiling water on attackers in an effort to keep them at bay, all while being safely behind the stonework. If you've got some spare 1x1 round bricks, you can even play this scenario out. As you can see, the other half of the exterior is identical, save for this small barrel with a few swords in it, so it's time to head inside. But we're not going in through the front gate. We're just gonna crack the castle in 2. A Technic pin keeps the walls securely in place when closed, and this also serves another purpose, which we'll get to in a bit. And it looks like we arrived just in time to see our 4 knights gearing up for some action. These are my favorite minifigures of the 12 we get, and while LEGO's knight designs would only get cooler as time went on, these guys seem perfectly capable of defending the honor of the Black Knights. Each one gets a grill-style helmet with a yellow or red plume, silver breastplate printing on their torso, a shield, a lance or standard, however you want to see it, and a broadsword. Since, like almost all minifigures, they only have 2 hands, the third accessory can be clipped to their saddle, since each of them also gets a steed. We've seen many LEGO horses before, but these 2 are especially special, thanks entirely to these beautiful bardings. The printing design is identical between the pair, just in different color combinations, but I think my favorite is this one. The box art suggests that you give it to this guy, and since he's the only one with a black helmet, black torso, black legs, and this nifty little plastic cape, I think it's safe to assume that he is, in fact, the Black Monarch of Black Monarch's castle. With our knights riding off to protect the land, we can get a better look at the courtyard. One thing a vast majority of LEGO castles have in common is that they leave most of the interior decorating up to you. Besides a few weapons clipped to the wall, the only real feature inside is going to be this cell in the corner, which I suppose is meant to represent the dungeon. It's a great inclusion and has ample space for multiple prisoners. I also really like these little alcoves built into the rear towers. There's nothing inside them, but if one of our guards needs a nap, or if you happen to have a spare ghost on hand. But overall, the castle is pretty devoid of interior detail. Perhaps some would see this as a shortcoming, but I see it as an exciting opportunity to really make this set our own. I've cooked up some custom additions that I'll be adding to mine, using build techniques and parts I have from roughly this time period, give or take a few years. First up, a little detail I've always loved was the well from 1995's Royal Knights Castle. I completely ripped off the design of the well itself from that set and just added my own roof to it, complete with working bucket. Second, since we have horses, we need a stable, right? Here's one that'll house 2 at a time, complete with feed troughs and a space to hang their saddles when not in use. I'll admit that I over-engineered this one a little bit, but the parts are all period correct, so you could have built this in 1988. An armory is an obvious must-have, and this small build seems to do the trick. I did cheat a little with these doors. They wouldn't come out till the following year, but they just work so well, I'll let it slide. Lastly, I feel like every castle should have a throne room. The most logical place for that seems to be this space above the main gate, which coincidentally is also where I placed it in my Lion Knights castle. Perhaps in about 20 or 30 years I'll get to review this set, when it's good and vintage. I was tempted to replace the original 4x8 plate here with something a bit larger for more floor space, but I generally strive to maintain the integrity of the original design and try to keep my mods easily removable should I decide to revert back to the stock set. But now we have a throne for the Black Monarch, a place for some of his treasure, and some royal refreshments. I was also sorely tempted to use gold coins here, but stuck to the castle tradition of yellow studs. There are an endless amount of ways to customize this space, and it's so much fun to do. Feel free to sound off in the comments with your own ideas for spicing this place up. Now, back to these Technic pins. One thing the early castle themes really excelled at was the ability to combine multiple sets into one. This trend began way back in 1984 with 6080 King's Castle, and would continue well into the 90s. This was a great way for kids to expand their kingdoms, not to mention a great way for LEGO to sell more sets, and it's something we don't see quite as much these days, outside of Harry Potter and the Modular Buildings collection. There were 2 sets intended to directly interface with Black Monarch's castle, 6059 Black Knight's Stronghold, and 6034 Black Monarch's Ghost. both of which came out 2 years after the castle in 1990. And both of them feature Technic connections that match up almost perfectly with the castle, allowing for easy expansion. I say almost because the castle is built on thin base plates, while these both sit on standard plates, but it still works fine. My version of Black Knight's Stronghold is something I just cobbled together from parts I already had, so I don't have all the extra minifigures and such that you'd get from the actual set, and these panel pieces here would normally be plain black, but I think it's enough to get the idea across. This definitely adds some bulk to the castle, the only drawback being that you no longer have studs covering the entire courtyard, and the odd angles make adding additional plates difficult. But I'll bet if you had another copy or two of Black Knight's Stronghold, you could probably square things up. And if you're just looking to add to the outer wall, bricklinking the parts to build one of these sections isn't too awfully hard on your wallet. These are both great additions, and decent sets in their own right. I'm sure we haven't seen the last of them on this channel. The other option for display, with or without the extra sets, is to leave the castle open. This is actually how mine stays most of the time, because I love how grand and expansive it appears to be in this configuration, and it's perfect if your display shelves happen to be of the more shallow variety. As time rolled along, LEGO castles would continue to mature into bigger, better, more detailed structures. But as far as the 1980s goes, this was the cream of the crop in my opinion. This was a time when the castle theme was still solidly grounded in reality, before the ghosts and wizards and dragons really started upping the fantasy factor. Not that I mind those additions, in fact I love some of them, and part of me really wishes pirates had received the same treatment at some point. But here, things were more simple, more clean and clear-cut. If I had to choose between this and something like Nightlord's Castle or Fire-Breathing Fortress, I wouldn't even have to think about it. If you're just getting started on your castle collection, I think this would be a prime candidate for a first big purchase. It can be expensive in the $200 to $300 range, but keep in mind that it was also pretty expensive in 1988, and when you take inflation into account, you're not paying too much more than the original retail price if you can find a decent deal. So how much did I pay for mine? Remember the intro where I mentioned miracles and luck and the pinnacle of my LEGO collecting journey? Well, back in 2019, I was perusing eBay, and I stumbled upon a bulk lot listing for about 13 pounds of vintage LEGO. If I remember correctly, it had just been listed, and the asking price was only $50. Today, I'd jump on this without hesitation, but I spent some time poring over the few photos, which, as you can see, weren't very good. But I recognized a few interesting parts and minifigures, so I crossed my fingers and pulled the trigger. Well, when it showed up and I opened it, I was immediately hit with a wave of euphoria. What quickly became evident was the fact that not all of what I'd received had been shown in the photos, and I began pulling out things like raised base plates and parts that I knew only came in certain, very expensive and sought-after sets. Long story short, this is just part of what came out of that $50 eBay lot. A conservative estimate for the whole thing would be somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 worth of sets, and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. We'll be taking a close look at each one of these in future reviews, one in particular very soon. So, if you're ever feeling discouraged that your collection isn't where you want it to be, or a set you want is too expensive, remember that anything can happen. Sometimes it just takes good timing, some knowledge of what to look for, and most of all, a little luck. My hope is that each and every one of you gets to experience something like this at least once. So, that's my grand collecting story. Have you ever stumbled into a crazy good deal? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. There are so many more amazing castle sets to look at in the future, and I hope you'll stick around to see them. But until then, this has been Jamie for TrikBrix. Thanks for watching everyone, and as always, take care and play well.